Welcome to the final module of the course. I will conclude about looking at the future of humanity, which is something near and dear to all of us. So, let's get started. Human evolution is a study of the present and the past. We seek to understand our origins and to figure out why we humans are the way we are. But to end this class, let's look to the future. By understanding the past, you are now equipped to understand the future and to envision how human behavior and the alterations we are making to planet Earth will affect our lives and the lives of future generations of humans. Throughout its history, Earth has changed, both geologically and biologically. But for the first time, human behavior is affecting Earth and all its inhabitants, including we humans ourselves. For example, to power our world, humans have discovered and burned an amazing energy source, coal. Think for a moment what coal actually is. It is a fossil remains of plants and small animals that have been compressed over hundreds of millions of years into a rock that can be burned for energy. It is truly amazing, but there are always trade-offs, and one byproduct of burning fossil fuels like coal is air pollution, like that shown in this image. There are obvious health consequences of breathing in this polluted air, and that has had an impact on our biology. In this lecture, I will delve into some of the most important and at times controversial topics of our time. We will look at the forces shaping human biology today. These range from global climate change and its impact on our world to the exponential increase in human population and the depletion of resources so vital to our survival. We will explore the biological consequences of these forces and will then consider the possibility that humans are still evolving. You are welcome to think about what humans might look like a million years from now, but the truth is, we don't really know. Though politically controversial, global warming is not scientifically controversial whatsoever. The planet is getting warmer and the data are irrefutable. The degree to which human behavior is causing global warming and what the long-term consequences may be are topics that are scientifically debated. Look at the graph at the top of the slide. Notice that since 1880, global temperature has fluctuated from year to year, but the general trend is an upward one, resulting in a planet that is now warmer than it was a century earlier. Although the temperature change may seem quite small, less than a degree Celsius, even this modest change has had an impact on Earth's ecosystem. For instance, glaciers like the one atop Mount Kilimanjaro in the bottom image have shrunk by up to 85%. Melting of polar ice caps has increased sea levels by 5 inches in the last 100 years. These are measurable changes that are caused by global warming. But what causes global warming? Global warming is nothing new to planet Earth. The planet warmed considerably during the Eocene and at times during the Pleistocene. In fact, the end of the last ice age, approximately 10,000 years ago, was a period of global warming. The difference this time around is that there is strong evidence that humans are at most causing, and at the very least, accelerating the warming of the planet by introducing excessive amounts of greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. The image on the right illustrates the concentration of another greenhouse gas released during the burning of fossil fuels, nitrogen dioxide. These greenhouse gases accumulate in Earth's atmosphere and trap heat the way a greenhouse does, resulting in a warming of the planet. In other words, there is not just a correlation between the buildup of carbon dioxide and temperature, there is a known mechanism for global warming. Throughout Earth's history, increased concentrations of carbon dioxide correlate with increased global temperatures and vice versa. But unlike other periods of global warming, this one may be anthropogenic or human-caused. How do we know what the climate was like thousands or even hundreds of years ago? And how do we know that temperature is correlated with carbon dioxide concentrations? One way scientists have investigated this relationship between global gases and temperature is through the study of ice cores. Scientists have devised clever techniques to extract cores of ice from glacial ice fields in the Arctic, Antarctica, Greenland, and elsewhere to study past environments. Some of these cores are hundreds of feet deep and document layer by layer the ice and snow deposited over the course of the last 800,000 years. In each of these layers, scientists can read the history of Earth's climate like a book. They can document whether any layers are infused with dust or particles from volcanic eruptions. They can measure carbon dioxide concentrations by extracting the gas from air bubbles trapped in the gas. And they can reconstruct the temperature at a time by measuring the concentration of oxygen isotopes in the sample. Warmer temperatures are indicated by higher concentrations of the isotope oxygen-18, cooler temperatures by less oxygen-18. The analyses are consistent and robust. Earth is warming, and much of that warming is a result of the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Since Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, and this is not the first time the planet has warmed, some may wonder what the big deal is. Why should we care that the Earth is warming? As we have already learned in this class, climate has a profound impact on biological evolution. A changing climate can alter habitat distribution and food resources. And while climate change is often celebrated as a driver of evolutionary change, what is often forgotten is that the fossil record is littered with the bones of extinct creatures who were unable to adapt to a changing climate. If the planet continues to warm, scientists predict that it will result in an increase of wildly fluctuating weather patterns and a shift in precipitation patterns. Some of the great agricultural regions of the globe may dry up, resulting in conditions like the Dust Bowl, shown at the bottom left slide. Now, this was experienced by the Great Plains in the 1930s. Climate extremes, such as sustained drought in agricultural regions, would stymie food production, increasing global malnutrition and starvation. Look at the bottom right. In fact, scientists fear that global climate change will have a marked impact on human health in the coming years. Notice in the top image the increase in mortality across the globe already attributed to a changing climate. It is important to recognize that humans are not the only animals affected by climate change. As habitats are altered either indirectly through climate change or directly by deforestation, more and more of Earth's biodiversity is in peril. The data indicate that as human population density has increased, species diversity in a region has dropped. Paleontologists are certainly accustomed to studying extinction. However, the current rates of extinction, which are predicted to reduce species diversity by up to 14% in the coming decades, are alarmingly rapid. Keep in mind, however, that this is just not a problem for the plants and animals facing extinction, but a huge problem for humans as well. There is a strong relationship between the health of a local ecosystem and the health of the humans inhabiting it. Take, for example, the following situation. West Nile virus is a potentially fatal illness passed to humans by mosquitoes. There are studies indicating that the disease prevalence is increased in regions where bird diversity has been reduced. Without the natural check on disease-carrying organisms like mosquitoes or ticks, human diseases such as West Nile virus, Lyme disease, or malaria are certain to increase in frequency. And I know this from personal experience, as my father died from West Nile disease a few years ago. Scientists fear that the combination of global climate change, accelerating human population growth, and the reduction of biodiversity is creating a silent tsunami that will result in an increase in thousands of human deaths each year from infections and diseases. As this image shows, some of these infectious diseases have been known to humans for a long time and are re-emerging, often by evolving drug resistance, like tuberculosis and malaria, while others are newly evolved forms, like Ebola and SARS. The World Health Organization predicts that the risk of disease will double between now and 2030. Why? In part because there are more humans than ever, 7.1 billion, and many of us are living in very close proximity to one another. In fact, 50% of the world's population now lives in cities. That close proximity increases the risk of disease transmission. Mortality rates are expected to be greatest in parts of Africa and Asia, where the medical community is not as well supplied with proper treatments. But even outside the cities, the risk of disease is increasing. For instance, as forests are cut to clear land for crops, more open areas with pooling water are available for mosquitoes to breed and lay their eggs. More mosquitoes means more malaria. Furthermore, as the planet warms, malaria-carrying mosquitoes expand their territory into areas previously too cold to sustain them, spreading the disease even further. This has been a real downer of my lecture so far, but it is important to recognize that our behavior as a species has an impact on our planet, which in turn can affect our own health as a species. Of course, our behavior is complex, and there have been wonderful advances in medicine and technology that have improved human health and have extended our lifespans. For example, on average, Americans now live 30 years longer than they did in 1900. The average age at death in 1900 was nearly 50 years old. It is now close to 80. Notice in the top chart, this trend has been steady and consistent. Furthermore, this increase in longevity is not restricted to Americans, but has occurred around the globe. Third world nations have witnessed a smaller increase in longevity, and some places, such as South Africa, have actually experienced a drop in average age at death as a result of the AIDS epidemic. But for most industrialized countries, lifespan is increasing. However, increased longevity comes at a cost. Notice in the bottom left graph that the number of hip fractures in women in Hong Kong and in Britain have increased considerably. As a population ages, the rate of osteoporosis, heart disease, and cancers have increased. There are always trade-offs, and even with something as positive as increased longevity, there are negative consequences. Not only are Americans living longer, we are taller and heavier than humans were 100 years ago. Look closely at this figure. In 1850, the average male was 5 feet 7.5 inches tall and weighed about 150 pounds. The average male today is 2 inches taller and almost 50 pounds heavier. Why? In part, our Western diet is to blame. This diet is quite high in saturated fats and sugars, which results in more obese individuals. Furthermore, low-income families tend to consume less food with protein and fiber, which can be expensive, and more fats and sugars. They are usually less expensive. And this results in an unfortunate but interesting and complex relationship between obesity and socioeconomic status. This dietary shift and the resulting increase in obesity is termed the nutrition transition. This, along with a general decline in physical activity, has led to a worldwide epidemic in obesity. As noticed in the last slide, the obesity epidemic is not restricted to Americans. It is a worldwide phenomenon. As countries around the world westernize their diets, they consume fewer cereals and tubers and more fats and sugars. The result has been a global increase in the percentage of the population that is obese. The graph at the bottom shows not the percentage of people that are obese, but the percentage increase in obesity in these populations over the last few decades. Because obesity has been linked to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, respiratory illnesses, sleep disorders, and even depression, these numbers are a cause for concern. We have been discussing diseases, and one may think that the solution to the risk of disease is to remain as clean and sterile as possible. But that may not be the case at all. It may seem counterintuitive, but there is some evidence that the human immune system may benefit from early exposure to everyday germs, and that overcleanliness is in part to blame for the increased incidence of allergies we see in many Americans. Scientists have discovered that children who play in the dirt and come in contact with germs that do not cause disease actually build more robust immune systems and do not have a strong and inflammatory response to later infections. This idea is known as the hygiene hypothesis. Some scientists have hypothesized that our obsession with cleanliness results in a mismatch between our sterile world and our immune systems, which have evolved to fight pathogens but never have the opportunity to do so. Instead, these immune systems target harmless allergens like dust, pollen, shown on the upper right, dander on the lower left, and the proteins in peanut butter. Allergies are also known to be exacerbated in areas that have a high concentration of environmental pollutants that can cause negative immune responses, which can be quite dangerous. I, for example, have severe allergies, sinus problems, and asthma. When I was being raised in the 1960s, my mother required extreme cleanliness at all times. Though unknown to her, this, I believe, is a root cause of my allergies. We have repeatedly assumed that human behavior is affecting the biological world. But what is the evidence that our actions have actually resulted in real, measurable biological evolution? The evidence comes from a variety of sources, from studies on flies and bacteria to studies on humans. For instance, 80 years ago, chemists developed an insecticide that had the promise of wiping out the global threat of malaria. That chemical was DDT. But only 50 years after its first application, 500 mosquito species had already evolved resistance to this insecticide. Additionally, antibiotics like penicillin have saved millions of lives, but antibiotic-resistant bacteria have evolved and are once again posing a serious risk to the population. The evidence for continued evolution may be best seen in humans. As we have already discussed in this class, humans have quite recently developed more gracile faces as a result of dietary changes. The frequencies of genes imparting resistance to malaria have increased in certain areas of the world. In other populations, there are mutations in particular genes that impart resistance to HIV, smallpox, and the plague. There's evidence for quite recent evolution in human skin coloration, adaptations for high altitude, and a shift to an agricultural diet. In fact, because of the rate of mutation is related to the population size, some researchers have hypothesized that the growing human population provides the genetic variation necessary for evolution. In other words, instead of human evolution stopping, it may be accelerating. The story of human evolution is thus not over. Not in the least. Our species is remarkable. We are modified apes, having evolved from a last common ancestor we shared with our extraordinary African ape relatives. We have evolved a unique form of locomotion, bipedalism, and an exceptionally large brain that led to language and sophisticated culture. Our ability, even our inherent need to alter our world through technology, has brought about intense selection pressure not only on our fellow creatures, but on ourselves. How we deal with these self-inflicted problems will define the next chapter, the as of yet unwritten chapter of the human story. Thank you so much for being in the class. It's been a great pleasure working with you this term.